Good evening, everybody. My name is May Estrada. I am the Associate Dean and Vice President for Enrollment Management, Student Financial Services, and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And joining me today is my colleague, Director Brian Kazuba, also a graduate of New York Law School. And why don't I just go ahead and pass the mic so he can also say hello to all of you.
Thank you, Dean Estrada. Welcome, everyone. Hope everyone's finding their virtual seats in our webinar this evening. Thank you for tuning in wherever you are in the world tonight. As Dean Estrada said, the Director of Admissions at New York Law School. I'm a graduated way back in 2004. My 20-year reunion is in a couple of weeks. I'm very excited, but I'm excited to be here tonight to talk to you about navigating the application process, and particularly starting off talking about the wonderful aspect of resumes that are included in your application. So, and just as a reminder, we're going to be focusing tonight on resumes and letters of recommendation. We did do a session a couple of weeks back on personal statements and an overview session back in August. You can find that overview section on New York Law School's YouTube channel, and we'll be having another part of our navigating series coming up in December, focusing on understanding the CAS report, and then a wrap up in January. So stay tuned for more events. So we're going to start tonight with the resume portion. So a well-written resume is very important in your application. It strongly aids different parts of your application, in particular your personal statement. Because if you do a resume right and you detail and itemize and put everything that you want to make sure that the application committee sees, you don't waste time and space having to list that and regurgitate all that in your personal statement. You can focus your personal statement on a very pointed, strong topic that you want to focus on. So anything that you don't necessarily want to spend time in your personal statement, your resume is a great place to make sure that the reader gets to see that. Resumes are not universal. Resumes will look different depending upon what you're applying for, whether you're applying for schools, whether you're applying for jobs, different types of jobs. It will determine how you order each section and what information you're going to include or exclude. When you get to law school, you will learn how to create a legal resume to use when seeking internships and other post-law school jobs. For now, don't worry if you do not know how to put together a legal resume. That will come. We will work with you very soon into your first year on how to put that together. Our school is great. Our career services office will work with you on that. As far as setting up your sections, depending upon what your sections are, you want to do things in reverse chronological order. So put your most recent employment and your most recent educational experiences at the top of each section. So start from what you're doing most recently and work your way back, okay? In terms of length, at the end of the day, the key thing is to just be clear and concise throughout. As you're describing what you did in certain roles, make sure you do your best to summarize those tasks, responsibilities, and accolades the best that you can. Don't make the admissions committee have to read long bullet points that might go on 2 or 3 lines. Be clear and concise. Try to keep each bullet point to 1 line. That is it's an invaluable tool to know as a lawyer. A lot of the game as a lawyer is being clear and concise because you do not want to lose your reader. You do not want to lose the judge. So the same thing applies for the admissions committee that is reviewing your application. Use your best judgment for the overall length. For most, for you coming straight from college, the resume really should be no more than a page. However, if you are a non-traditional student and you've had already a career thus far, it may make sense for it to be a little bit longer. So use your judgment as to the overall length. Proofread, proofread, proofread. Read your resume carefully. Check carefully for spelling, for grammar, for proper use of commas. I happen to love a good Oxford comma. If you do too, make sure you're consistent when using that. Make sure your layout is consistent throughout. Don't use bullet points in one section, and then numbers in the other. Keep your fonts and your size the same throughout. Watch when you use bold or italics or underlines, and again, keep it consistent. However you decide to do it in the beginning, don't deviate from that later. At the end of the day, this all matters. Content and experience can be amazing, but if poorly written or poorly presented, it could have an effect on how the committee sees you as a candidate for law school. Take an example. You get a great 4-star meal, but you're being served in this dingy restaurant, not the cleanest, not the well-kept, maybe not the greatest service. Your overall experience was not great despite the food being good. You're probably not going to go back. So you want to make sure that there's not errors or mistakes, or that the committee has a hard time, really getting to appreciate the content of your resume or content of your entire application as a whole. Keep your resume professional looking. Remember what you're applying for. You're applying for law school and you're applying for a career in law, not necessarily something like a creative arts role. So don't play with pictures, fun colors, maybe weird font types or emojis. Keep it clean and use universal fonts and sizes that are, relatively default. Be inclusive of all your experiences. Don't worry if you don't have necessarily legal experiences. You will get that in law school. We're not necessarily expecting you to come in and have years of experiences working in law offices as paralegals or such. That's going to come. That's our job to help you, get those experiences here. But the committee will evaluate your application in many ways. And part of being a successful law student is being able to apply for internships and jobs, perform well on job interviews, and have positive work experiences where you do well in the eyes of your employer and colleagues. So the committee will look favorably on those who have good work positive experiences. So especially if you're working during school, tell us how many hours. Law school is all about balance. When you're in school, there's going to be times you're going to have part-time jobs, you're going to be clinics, you're going to be externships. So you're going to have to balance going to class and also having these job type experiences. So the committee is going to want to see, well, when you were getting that 3.8, what were you doing besides that? Were you working? Were you doing other things? We want to see that you're going to be able to balance and be able to, succeed when having a lot of different things on your plate. List all your honors and activities. Again, same thing applies. We want to see that while you were doing well in class, that you were active, that you were doing things. Again, law school, you're going to be joining, clubs and extracurricular activities, maybe moot court, maybe law review. You're going to have other things going on. We're going to want to see that you are able to do well and succeed academically while having these other things going on. Your educational section. Again, start from the most recent college and work your way back. But for the most part, leave off your high school years at this point. Unless possibly if you started something there that you're still involved in. Maybe you were involved in, either Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, at a younger age, and you're still involved in that program now. That's something that, would be worth still putting on your resume, even though you started it maybe, several years back. Interests and hobbies and skills. So when you talk about them, it's important parts of your resume because, again, it focuses on things that you can do and what you're interested. But leave off the basic skill sets like proficiency in Microsoft Word. At this point, that's something that universally people should be able to be knowledgeable about. So do not spend time talking about things that are universally should be known. But talk about advanced skills. Talk about things that, maybe are more than just the basic proficiency in skill sets. When talking about your hobbies, don't necessarily keep it too broad. You want to sort of, again, get the attention of the admissions committee that's reading your application. So if you're an avid reader, don't just say you're a reader, but maybe, list a couple of books that you read, or, that you read, the full Chronicles of Narnia, or all the Harry Potter books, or the entire extended universe of the Star Wars universe. Talk about something specific, because again, now you might pique the interest of the committee reading it. They're like, oh, I like that too. This is someone I'd want to meet. This is someone I want to get to know, or other things. Talk about more, the specifics, because that will be that humanistic quality, and then make you sound interesting, and the committee will want to meet you and learn from you and learn more from you. So I will stop there and turn it back to Dean Estrada.
Great. Thank you so much, Director Kazuba. So the next segment of this webinar is going to address letters of recommendation and what are they, who should write them, and what it should include. And for New York Law School specifically, we require one letter of recommendation. The maximum letter of recommendations we accept is 3. All of your recommenders must submit the recommendation directly to the Law School Admission Council. And you as an applicant must designate which letter of recommendations would go to which school. So that is a very important piece. Also, you are waiving your rights to see your letter of recommendation by submitting it through Law School Admission Council, and that is the only way that we are accepting letters of rec. So as a recap, requirement 1 letter of recommendation, maximum 3. And so basically, for the letter of recommendation, when you are selecting who is going to write your recommendation, you want to make sure that you are allowing enough time for your recommender to write on your behalf. I generally say allow 4 to 6 weeks. You never know what is on their plate. Perhaps they may be writing a number of recommendations. So you want to make sure that you are giving yourself enough time by working backwards from the deadline of when you would like to submit your application. Who should write them? The person or people that should write them should include people who could really assess and articulate your ability to succeed in law school. So if you are still in undergrad, it would be in your best interest to make sure that you've built relationships, professional relationships with your recommender so that they can write about your academic abilities. It may include you bringing your resume, your personal statement, or even past work that you've concluded from their classes to help create some of that memory of who you are and how you stood out as a student. Perhaps you did some work with a number of deans from other departments. That might be also another good option of who should write your recommendation. If you have been removed from undergrad for quite some time, we will, seek recommendations from perhaps your employer, maybe your community organizer, if you were part of an organization where they were able to assess your ability to succeed in law school. People whom we don't necessarily want recommendations from, even though they think that you are a wonderful applicant to law school, would be 1, your parents. And believe it or not, we do receive letters of recommendations from parents. Your lawyer friends, right? They are going to be biased. They are going to believe and think the world of you, as they should. But I am not quite sure that they are the person in the best position to assess your academic ability and how that transfers over into law school. And so let's talk a little bit about what this letter of recommendation should entail. And I like to break it down to about 4 pieces. The first, as I've harped on, was academic ability. So they should highlight specific examples of your analytical, writing, and research skills. It's great that you came to class on time. It is wonderful that you completed your homework, but that's what you should be doing as a student. I want to learn more and in detail through examples. How are you good at analytical skills, writing skills, research skills, all of the skills that you will be using as a first, second, or even a 3rd year student in law school? They should also mention any impressive academic achievements, critical thinking, intellectual curiosity that sets you apart from everybody else. Remember, law schools are reading thousands and thousands of letters of recommendation. So you want to make sure that this recommender is setting you apart, not just from their own classes, but also from the rest of the applicant pool. We want to also address work ethic and motivation. So your recommender should be providing your dedication, examples of your dedication, your initiative, your perseverance. Mention any instances where you have demonstrated leadership skills, collaboration, or even the ability to work under pressure. We want to learn more about your own personal qualities. So we want them to describe your integrity, maturity, professionalism, emphasize traits such as empathy, fairness, and commitment, right? But give specific examples. It's not just that John Doe is a compassionate and empathetic person. Well, I want to know how John Doe possessed those skills. What did that include and what did that mean? So again, being very specific when they are describing your characteristic. And then, of course, communication skills. Being in law school and being an attorney requires a lot of communication, whether that is oral or written communication. And so it is crucial for your law school success. So if your recommender can touch upon the ability for you to articulate your point of view, to convince or advocate a specific thought, both in speaking and writing, I think that would be helpful. In fact, one of the best letters of recommendations that I've read in the last 23 years was not a student who received an A, but a student who received the C+. And the recommender was very detailed in describing their grit, their tenacity, their passion, things that you can't necessarily teach in law school. That is a characteristic that is going to be helpful for an applicant, for a student, when they are in law school, right? The material will be, in some instances, will be easy to follow. In some instances, very dry and hard to follow. So in those moments, how can a student excel and get through the coursework, the class, the paper, the reading, etc.? Do they have that tenacity and grit? Do they have that passion? Are they willing to push themselves and take advantage of the resources? And if so, how did they do that? And so these are qualities and traits that I am looking for in a law school applicant. Most recommendations are no more than a page, sometimes two. Oftentimes we receive recommendations from well-known politicians, well-known lawyers, things of that sort. And while that is great that you've had the opportunity to work with these individuals, sometimes or oftentimes it is written by somebody else in their office. Maybe they're a legal assistant, maybe they're executive assistant. And so we begin to see templates that look very, very similar in nature. And the only thing that is different is the name of the applicant. So I share all of this to say, when you are choosing your recommender, it is important to give ample time for them to write a great letter of recommendation on your behalf. Come prepared with evidence, personal statement, resume, past work to help them write a strong letter of recommendation for you. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you schedule some time to also speak with them as to why it is that you want to pursue a legal education. With that, I want to go ahead and open it up for questions because this is very much your session. We wanted to give you the broad scope of things, and then we can take a deeper dive based on the questions that you may have. So you are welcome to drop them in the Q&A, and we will be answering them and going through them live. Let's see. me just open this up. Should the letter of recommendation come from former professors? Absolutely. Presuming that they are able to articulate why you are a good candidate, right? As long as you give them something to work off so that they do remember how you stood out in their class, what your academic abilities look like, they should absolutely write a recommendation on your behalf.
Jump in terms of font sizes being the same throughout the resume, can we put headings in a larger size and the bullets as long as the headings are the same size and the bullets are the same size? Yeah, I think, use your discretion, but yes, again, it's all about consistency. So if your heading might be a point or so more than what's underneath in the bullets, as long as you're consistent, I don't see a problem with that.
Great. As a working adult in their mid-30s, could a letter be from a previous employer? Absolutely. Again, the goal here is choosing a recommender that is going to be able to write on your behalf what your qualities are, what your characteristics are, and how you will succeed in law school.
I'll jump in. Should we include any industry or professional awards, recognition, or only academic achievements? I think that's fine. Again, if you're especially coming from, non-traditional where you've had a career, those are good things to list in your resume. Those are things that you should be proud of and the committee would want to see.
There's a question about planning, right? As an applicant, you should be able to plan accordingly and plan ahead of time. So even though you are graduating in 2025 and don't plan to apply to law school until 2026, you are absolutely free to ask your professors to write on your behalf now. And just let them know that you'll be applying at a later time. So at least you have that in your quote unquote toolbox so that you could pull that out when you are ready to apply. I just caution applicants to, make sure their recommendations are no more than 2 years old.
Here's a good question. Since the application itself asks us to delineate awards and recognitions, can we leave them off our resume to make room for other things? Example, instead of listing them on the resume, summarize, scholarship amount, etc. Yeah, again, I think that's your discretion. If you feel that you have a lot of other things that you think that you want to add and you want to be able to remove things so it's not too long and you feel like it's going to be another part of the application, sure. But if you feel like you have the space for it, I think it's still fine because, you don't necessarily want the person reading the application to not see it there and have to necessarily search elsewhere. So I think it's a case by case. It depends upon how long that resume is already. But if you're getting to the point where, again, you feel like, oh, I really want to either put this or that, and you feel like, again, it is somewhere else in the application, I think that's a fine strategy to use.
I believe I answered this in my initial commentary. You should absolutely submit a personal statement, a refined personal statement to your recommender so that they understand why you are interested in going to law school. But if you could also have a conversation so that you could further explain that, that would be helpful because for a personal statement, we only allow 2 pages. And so you may not be able to communicate everything that you wanted to in 2 pages. So giving your recommender additional context would be in your best interest.
What is your biggest pet peeve as far as grammar goes when reviewing your resume? I think just grammar mistakes in general at this point, in a day and age where you can obviously use spell check and grammar check and you have the time to sit there and read it. You're not rushing through that and just hitting submit. It's not something you're taking a live test on. And you have time to look it over. You have time for someone else to look it over. At this stage of the game, when you have that amount of time, just grammar mistakes in general is just a pet peeve. So really, really do your best to proofread as many times as you can. you know, write it, take a walk around the block, come back, do it again, look at it again. Um, you know, definitely work to get that part right.
Director Kazuba, is there a sample of what you are explaining when it comes to resume?
Um, do we have one?
A sample document, a sample acceptable letter of recommend, I'm sorry, a sample resume that is appropriate for law school applicants?
We can try to put one together and we can get one out to you all for sure.
I'm going to take this one, advice for academically dismissed students from any law school. The scenario becoming a caretaker made it challenging in the first year. So what status would you apply under? Now, while this does not fit in this segment of letters of recommendation or resume, it would be, you would be applying as a first-year student. Let's see, as a letter from 2021, okay. I try to keep my recommendations up to date. Is it okay? Sure. Is it preferred? Not necessarily. We would like to keep it no older than 2 years.
Should non-traditional students 5 to 10 years ago from undergrad put student activities and volunteer experiences where they had leadership roles on their resume? Yeah, I would, because again, you know, you're talking about that time, that's your educational experience, especially if you necessarily have not had a master's since then. So, you know, the committee's looking to see how you last, you know, performed while in an educational setting. So everything included. So we're still looking at that GPA from 5 to 10 years ago. So we're looking at all the aspects that surrounded what you were doing at that time when you were in class.
um, I want to keep this segment specifically on letters of recommendations and resume. If we have time after we've answered those questions, we're happy to dive into other components of the application, but this is the third workshop in navigating the application process. And so we try to designate you know, an hour for each section, because otherwise we could spend hours talking about the application itself. So with that, just confirming LORs, which means letters of recommendation, should only be 1 page, double space or single space. Single space is fine. 1 page is great. If it happens to be 2 pages, that is also okay.
The question, should resumes include all work history, even if it's important or maybe you meant unimportant? Because I think because then you mentioned retail, fast food, etc. Yeah, you know, I would. Again, I think it goes to show just your interactions, and even if it's fast food, you know, that shows that you went on an interview, you were successful on an interview. It shows that you showed up for all your shifts and you worked well with your colleagues, and you worked well with the customers, and you know, all those are transferable skill sets. So, and if you're doing that, especially while you know pursuing other academic needs and stuff like that, I think that's fine. Like if that's what you have, put it. If you have X number of, you know, maybe jobs that are maybe more in line with, you know, legal and professional roles, you know, you can maybe leave that off. But if that is your background, that's your work history, I would put it.
After our recommenders write the letter of recommendation, should we follow up with a note or email? What would we say that is more appropriate? Absolutely. I think you should follow up with a thank you note. And then if you have been admitted to New York Law School or any other law school, I think you should thank them again and let them know that status. Our own practice at New York Law School is after we've matriculated the class, we actually send a letter to all of the recommenders, thanking them for writing on the applicant's behalf and letting them know that this student or this applicant has now been admitted and part of our law school community.
While having a full-time job, I also nannied and was a child caretaker How would you like to see this show up on a resume when both things are happening simultaneously? Good question again. So go chronological in reversed order. So start with a job that you started most recently and then move back. So even if you worked at the same time, say you started one in August and one in September, start the September one first and the August one afterwards. But it's chronological, so you can show that you were doing multiple things at once.
Great. Director Kazuba, let's continue to expand on that because I think this question also touches on that. How do you like to see delineation of roles where one is full-time and at the same time working another part-time job on the resume?
And I think if you're going by the formula that you're going in reverse chronological order, stick with that. So whether it's full time or part time, if you're doing it at the same time, just go in chronological order. It might be difficult to necessarily bunch part times in one spot and full times in another. So just keep it simple and go in chronological order.
My thoughts on a letter of recommendation from a private tutor. It really depends. It depends on how long you've been working with them. Um, who is the tutor? Is it just a more of a peer? Is it somebody with years and years of experience in tutoring hundreds of students in a particular subject matter? How long did you work with a tutor? So I think it all depends on those components. And have they themselves understand the rigorness of law school? Not necessarily have to go to law school, but do they understand the academic rigor of law school to write a very effective letter of recommendation on your behalf?
Could you speak to the best way to handle some gaps in employment due to family obligations and taking care of a family member in hospice? So I think that's a good point. I think if you're writing a resume and you feel like there is that gap that the committee is going to notice that you don't necessarily have anything going on, you could always use your optional statements to discuss that time period as to why there is that gap.
Director Kazuba, if an alum of New York Law School is writing, or if they even just have a family member, is that okay to list on the resume or elsewhere?
I think it's okay to list. I'll pitch it back to you. I don't know where you think the best. Do we ask for?
Yeah, I wouldn't list it on the resume.
Yeah.
I would list that on your application because we do ask for legacy information on the application itself. Okay, we're gonna try to get through these additional questions, so bear with us. I believe we talked a little bit about the length and time in which a recommendation should be valid. So again, for those of you who are just joining us, it should not be older than 2 years is the preference. Let's see. How much time in between jobs is considered a gap in the resume? And should we address that in a resume or the addendum itself?
I would put that in the addendum, if there's the gaps, I think the addendum is the appropriate place to do it. Just the flow of a resume that doesn't allow for that explanation.
This is a common question that we receive. I haven't done much organized volunteering work, whether that is lately or ever. And so I'm concerned that the committee will look down on this. I do act of service, not necessarily associated with an organization, nor is it formal. Where does that belong? On a resume? In my personal statement, in an optional statement? Where can that be addressed so that we still have that competitive edge? I can take this one. So as Director Kazuba mentioned earlier in his remarks, there is not a one-size-fits-all resume template. The resume that you use for applying to law school will look differently from the resume that you are using for employment. And it will certainly look differently once you are in law school. So we will be going through a number of revision exercises. So for the law school component, it is okay to list that as part of any extracurricular activities.
If I've been working for the last 2 years since graduating in 2022, but want to highlight hobbies, interests outside of work, is it okay to include extracurriculars from college, 2018 to 2022, that exemplify leadership roles? Yes, as we said, anything that happened during your collegiate career is fair game. We specified, leave out things, high school and beyond. But again, we want to see what you were doing during your collegiate career while you were studying, while you were getting your grades. So including that stuff there is appropriate.
What are examples of resume experience that have really stood out to you as a committee when reviewing applications that do not necessarily have strong numbers? So I want to take a step back. Your job as an applicant is to put together a package taking the different components of the application and ensuring that they are concise, well-rounded, and support your claims, right? So you have all these various components. You want to make sure you're tying them up into this package so that when you submit it, it makes the committee or allows for the committee to review it seamlessly and not leave gaps in between each component. It is your job to advocate on behalf of yourself when you are applying to law school. So you need to ensure that every component of the application is strong. Now, to the point of the question, what stood out in the resumes? If you've done what I said earlier nicely, each component will support and play off one another. They will support why you want to go to law school through examples. We will hear it in your voice, in your personal statement. We will see it through experience and evidence through your letter of recommendation and resume. It might be helpful to also include the number of hours that you are working, especially if you are still an undergrad. Maybe the reason why you received a C is because you were working 40 hours a week as a first generation college and law school applicant, having to support your family. We won't know that unless you share that with us. So it is okay to share the number of hours you are presently working while in undergrad. Something that also stands out to us is that you are using your resume as a place to show the evidence in which you are making those claims in your personal statement. So if you are saying to us that you really want to go to law school because of A, B, C, and or D, you need to make sure you've demonstrated some of those examples through the resume. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to work at a law firm or have experience. That is more for your benefit than it is for ours, because we recognize without a legal education, law firms are not necessarily giving you the work that they would a first or second or third year law student, right? But are there other experiences, extracurricular activities, things of that sort that demonstrate the skill set of critical thinking, research, writing? Doesn't have to be at a law firm. It could be elsewhere. I've heard time and time again, well, I work at Starbucks. What can I possibly contribute in terms of skill set to demonstrate my ability to succeed in law school. Working as a barista requires customer service, right? It requires being patient and articulating certain things. It requires detail orientation. So those are skill sets that could be valuable in law school that applicants may not be thinking about immediately.
Question, should I give a general overview on the purpose of awards or put specifically how my school describes them? I think that's a case-by-case basis. It's possible that the way the school describes them is not something that a general public member may not comprehend. So use your discretion and see if you feel that it needs a little bit more explanation, or maybe there's a way to shorten that explanation. Maybe the way that the school explains it could be a lot longer, and you can make it more clear and concise. Again, show us that you're able to do that. So I think that's a case-by-case basis based upon the description to see if you feel like it needs a little bit more, clarity, or if you can make it, more concise yourself.
How do you include research presentations? You can simply put it in its own category, unless you've presented within that organization or club or community that you've already listed, right? Again, getting out of your head and thinking to yourself that it does not necessarily need to follow the employer format. Close to it, sure, but you can write it in a summary form opposed to bullet points. If the presentation or written work or published work is not pertaining to one set of organizations or employer, you can simply just put that as extracurricular activities. You want to at least name the presentation and a link if it is available. Sometimes the committee is very much interested in either reviewing that for additional context or reading about it because it's something that they're simply interested in as well.
How can you showcase elements such as tenacity, multitasking, empathy, etc. within a resume? Great question, and it's very, very doable. As you're referencing the jobs, it could be took initiative to start a project, or was able to maintain doing XYZ at the same time, or stepped up and so as you're describing the acts you're doing, put some wording around it, characterizing it's describing that shows those things. Was eager to lead a particular event on a particular topic. So there's ways to use those descriptive words to showcase the things that you're trying to get out, rather than just list A, B, C, and D.
Right. I think there are several questions here that ask about the length of the resume, especially if they are still in undergrad or just recently graduated. So unless you've done a ton of publishing, written several books, your resume should really only be one page. And again, this is another way to demonstrate your ability to be concise and articulate your skill sets. So hopefully that answers that question. Let's see. Should the employment history in the application section match our resume? Ideally, yes. Because what happens is when we're looking at that, I think when I print the application, it's roughly 17 pages just in the demographic JD application itself. I look at that and sometimes, and most of the times actually, I cross-reference that with what they've listed on the resume. I cross-reference that with what is on their Credential Assembly Services report. So we do a lot of cross-referencing and cross-checking. So it should definitely match.
Would you advise we display any adversities we experienced during our undergraduate degree through our resume or personal statement? For example, if we worked 40 hours while pursuing our undergrad degree. So as I said earlier, if you did work during undergrad and you have these jobs, you let us know how many hours you did work. So there's, an obvious connection that the committee can put together that, okay, that naturally you were working this many hours and did well in school, or maybe you didn't do well in school. And then it's up to you. If you feel like that's something that you want to tie into the core themes of your personal statement, you feel like that is the appropriate place to do that, go for that. If you feel that you're trying to answer why maybe your GPA wasn't the best, probably not, don't use your personal statement for that, but use that additional statement. But again, I caution, don't necessarily play to the negative of that, but accentuate the positive and show that, you were able to overcome adversity and do that while working, because you had to work for whatever reason that you maybe had that happened. So I mentioned in the resume that your number of hours, and then again, strategically decide whether that's something that's going to be that core part of your personal statement, or if you rather than not be that, use your addendum to do that.
Are there any common mistakes applicants make on a resume that we should avoid? Absolutely. Number one, objective. Not necessarily a mistake, but you should avoid it because we know that your objective is to go to law school. Number two, fonts. Stick to the most common, Times or Arial. You don't need to have it in sans serif or any other font. Make it easy for us to read and to follow. Grammar, believe it or not, is also something that we see on the resume. Just because you are listing or summarizing briefly your skill set and or experience, you still need to make sure that you are providing your best writing. For those who are still an undergrad or recently graduated, it should not be more than one page. And then I would add the different resume designs that come in Microsoft Office where they have different colors and templates. You should just avoid that altogether and just make sure that it's easy to read, it's easy to follow, and it's neat in process.
Do you like to see fellowships as a separate category that are paid but may be through AmeriCorps or other fellowship organizations as opposed to professional experience? Good question. I think that's, again, case by case. If you feel like you have an extensive, employment history and you don't necessarily want that to get lost, and you feel like you have the spacing and the ability to be able to separate that category, go for that. But again, a lot of this is strategy based upon, again, trying to keep the resume fairly concise and trying to get to that one page if you can, or if you're going to go longer, but use your discretion. If that's something you want to really stick out, you feel passionate and strongly about that, you can definitely make it a separate category.
I want to address two questions that kind of blend in together as an example of a resume for either a non-traditional student or somebody who has worked multiple jobs or have multiple interests in extracurricular activities. So when you are evaluating those jobs, experiences, I think you will find that even though they are different employers or organizations, they require similar skill set. So what I would do, if it were me, is to take a stock, an inventory of everything that I've done leading up to law school. Where have I worked? When did I work? What did that entail? And I would have, my resume then would look very differently from a traditional resume. Maybe it would be the first kind of block on the resume would be the skills that I've acquired through the years, right? You're going to be writing, you're going to have analytical skills, etc. And then the second block may be listing the different employers and or organizations and the dates. Oftentimes you can fit that in one line, and the number of hours. And then the last piece would be, or the last block would be my own special interest that I may not have highlighted on my personal statement or optional essay that may make me unique. So again, that is not a traditional resume that you will see when you are applying for employment, but that is certainly acceptable in a law school application setting.
Hey, if I was later rehired as an independent contractor at the same employer after leaving the position, should I include that under the same section, under work experience on my resume, or two separate experiences because it makes my resume out of reverse chronological order? So I think it depends upon when that second independent contractor position began. So if you had the initial job, but then when you went off and did other things and then came back, I think you can list it separately. If it was you were there and then you left one position and then you immediately became the independent contractor, I think you could put it under the same heading. I mean, I've been working in New York Law School now for 12 years in various capacities, so I don't have separate things. You're putting that job location and then all the roles that you might have had under in one part. So I think it depends upon what was in between if something happened between.
We do not need to include, or you do not need to include phone numbers for your references. We will not be calling those references. We will be looking solely at your letters of recommendation. Publications, yes, it should be listed as a separate category. Again, I want you all to get into the mindset of taking a step back, right? And really doing the work, the inner work of reflecting on who you are at this point in time. Why law school? Why now? Why New York Law School? So asking those questions honestly and continuing to ask yourselves why, until you get to the root. What you will see is a common theme, evidence that supports your reason for going to law school. Most of the time, that content will be perfectly placed as supporting documents in your personal statement. Other times, it may fit in the resume. And to some degree, maybe that another, avenue is maybe that's what your letter of recommender should write on your behalf. So get into the mindset of just really reflecting on your path at the moment and getting out of your head that a law school resume must mirror an employer resume. So we just talked in detail what to include, what not to include. While we don't have a template, because there is not a template for applying to law school, there's not a one-size-fits-all template. Only when you do the work and ask those questions of yourself will you find that certain things belong in a personal statement, some belong in a resume, some belong in an optional essay, and some belong in your letters of recommendation. And the goal here is to take all of those different pieces together, make them concise and well-rounded and clear. And that package alone should be your best work to advocate on your behalf as to why we should admit you to law school. I hope that answers some of the varying questions in the Q&A.
So we have a few minutes left here. Along those lines, we have a question. Do we include experience gained after graduating high school, but before attending college? So again, a lot of this is strategy. A lot of this, again, as Dean Strada said, is what are you trying to get out to the committee as to who you are and why. So if that job experience you feel is relevant to who you are and what you want to be and why you're pursuing law school, then include it. So, think about whether that's relevant to your story and who you are.
Okay, let's see. I think we have time for one more question. Director Kazuba, is there anything here that stands out for you? And while Director Kazuba is looking at that, I just want to phrase that this is not a end all be all, right? Just because we have 3 minutes left, we invite you to continue to engage with us either by phone in future Zoom events, and certainly at our open house on Saturday, November 16th. Or you can just simply call us and get more clarification, because our goal is to ensure you have all of the information that you need to submit a well thought out, well-rounded, concise, and clear application package. So Director Kazuba, anything else on here that?
Yeah, just I'm seeing a couple of things about, being promoted internally, a couple of different questions there. Yeah, so you would put it under the same section. So hypothetically, you worked at New York Law School and you had, different job titles, list them all under each other with, the dates, and, that if you were, say, a professor from 2015 to 2018, and then from 2018 to 2020, you ran a department, list them together, and then under which you can, add all bullet points about the different tasks that you had for those particular roles. And reiterate, we do have another virtual event tomorrow night, where we will have our student ambassadors a chance to be able to interact with you, that Dean Estrada will moderate. So we'll have 4 of our NYLS students, 2nd and 3rd years, to be able to talk to them about their experiences on campus and to pick their brains. So we encourage you to come back tomorrow night and join us again.
And with that, my parting words for all of you is: 1, thanking you for your engagement and your interest in New York Law School; 2, recognizing that and really congratulating each and every one of you for taking this step to bring awareness into wanting to make a difference and be an advocate for your own communities and for yourselves and your families by earning a legal education; and 3, just really being mindful about using this journey of applying to law school as a way of self-reflecting. Things have changed. The world looks differently. There are many things that led you to your decision as to why you want to apply to law school. Take that exercise very seriously. Continue to ask those hard questions of yourself. And I guarantee you that when you do that work honestly and genuinely, you will come up with answers that you can put down on paper that will sound authentic and genuine. And guess what? That personal statement is something you're going to be able to pull in year 1, 2, or 3, or even 4 of law school, when days are hard, nights are long, and remembering your why. And that is going to be the most important motivator for you and to get you through to law school. So with that, I want to thank each and every one of you for your engagement. We look forward to continuing to provide these information sessions for all of you. Please stop by and visit us. We offer tours Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. and on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. But be well, be safe, and stay engaged. Take care, everyone.